Welcome to The Kingstonian, a podcast that profiles individuals who are passionate about what they do for a living, about what organization they belong to, or simply passionate about the community they are a part of. Hello there and welcome. My name is Dave Cunningham. 3 years ago, I sat down for a conversation with this gentleman. Our guest is passionate about his music, a musician since grade 6, a sound engineer and production supervisor at the Grand Theatre, and the custodian of the Facebook page Kingston History of Bands since his days in his dad's music store. And that's where we begin our conversation with Larry Stafford. Larry, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you for having me again.
I should have said welcome back to the program. I thank you very much for taking the time to chat with us. For those of our listeners who did not get the opportunity to listen to the first edition of Larry Stafford, I thought what we would do is talk a little bit about your background and how you got started in the music business, and let's go back a number of years.
Well, it would be a number of years. My dad opened a music store. Well, actually, you can go back further than that. My dad was a professional musician, and I played music all my life, starting in grade 6 public school, with band. I've played trumpet and later took piano lessons. But my dad opened a store in 1961 downtown Kingston, and I started working there at a very young age, part-time, and eventually was part of the ownership of the business and expanded it. That lasted for about 25 years. And then after that, when my dad retired from the store, I went to Renaissance Music. So constantly in touch with all the local music scene, and didn't really start playing in bands myself. I always say I was later than a lot of my friends, but I think it was probably about 1965 when I started to play in bands. And I've been playing in bands ever since, and still was until COVID. So.
When we talk about music stores back in the 60s, if I recall, because I can remember your dad's store because I was living in Kingston in the mid to late 60s, and there were stores that sold records, and they also sold the appliances, if you will, to play the records on, and some of them even got into selling musical instruments. So was your dad's store that type of store?
Well, we approached it the other way around. He opened it as a musical instrument store and sheet music. Excuse me. When I came into the business full time, I did go into some stereo equipment and some records, but it was mainly known as a music store that sold musical instruments and music instruction, teaching, that sort of thing.
Okay.
When the Beatles and the British invasion happened, every kid on the corner was in a band. And so that's when the record stores started branching out into musical instruments more. There was House of Sounds, of course. There was Morton's Record Bar that went into it. Maisel Tremblay opened shortly after. And eventually Gary Mullen and Joe Pereira opened Renaissance Music. And that's where I went after my dad closed the store. I went to Renaissance.
When people were performing back in the mid-'60s, as you said, when the Beatles came and people started putting together bands and doing gigs at high schools and that sort of thing, they would come into your store and put up a poster advertising their performance.
Exactly.
And so where did that lead for you?
Well, that's what, I collected all those and made scrapbooks and type things. Some I wish I had kept that I didn't, that would be rare today. But that eventually led to my Kingston History of Bands 2020 page, which is on Facebook currently, which is just a history of all kinds of music, not just rock bands, but every kind of music. And I had quite a collection of pictures, and it was suggested that I should post a page with that, which I did, and it just kind of ballooned from there. People submit pictures constantly. I'm always looking for new material, and it's a good outlet for new bands too. I always say to the young bands, hey, send me your picture. this isn't all about old history. This is all about music scene in Kingston. So I've got everything going back into the 40s, dance bands like my dad played in, right up to brand new bands just coming out in Kingston currently.
Now, do you still keep the actual paper copy of the poster?
I do. I still have a few boxes full of pictures, but I have transferred as much as possible, all of it onto my computer, into my photo, and I edit the pictures to enhance the color and things like that before I post them. It's a little side project, but it's become quite busy.
I was just wondering how much of your house is taken up by all of these posters that you have in boxes.
Well, if you're talking music, that's a good portion of my house. Actually, pictures, of course, don't take up that much room. So I've got about 4 boxes full of pictures that I've either had for years and years, or people have sent to me, or I've even had people drop some stuff by to me and just say, here's some pictures you can have. But I've got about 1,500 record albums. I've probably got the same number in CDs and cassettes still there, so it does take up a big portion of my house. Yes. Plus my musical instruments. I have my keyboard set up. So
for those people listening, if you have not had the opportunity, again, I would suggest you go to your Facebook account and call up Kingston History of Bands and have a look, because that's an incredible collection of pictures. And if you follow, there are certain people who have been in a lot of different bands, and that would include yourself, I would guess, that you can sort of trace a person's career in music, not to mention their hairstyles and fashion styles over the years, going back to the 60s or whatever. Let's talk a little bit about your career in music. So you started playing the trumpet when you were in grade 6 and moved to the keyboards, and eventually got involved in bands. So I would guess rock bands when the Beatles came along?
Yes.
That you started?
Yeah. My very first band was called the Banshee, and it was fairly short-lived, but I still have fond memories of it. I was playing keyboards in that band. That's when I started taking piano. But shortly thereafter, horn bands started to become a very popular thing, with Blood, Sweat, and Tears Chicago and that sort of thing. And so I pulled out the trumpet and started playing it a lot more. And in some of those bands, like Street Noise, I was strictly a trumpet player in those days. So back and forth. My last band that I was in for a long time was Philly of Soul, and I played mostly keyboards, and I started singing a lot more, and some trumpet. So doing all 3.
Now, do you sing lead vocals or just harmony?
No, I sing lead vocal and harmony. I started out just strictly singing harmony, and then decided I was never wanted to be a front man. I'm not going to be the guy out front. That's not me. So I always kind of hid behind my keyboard, but I decided that it was time to start pushing myself a bit into singing lead vocal too. So I've done quite a bit of that.
Now, you're still in a band now?
I play with Steve Cheeseman and the Heaters, which is a band that's been around for 45 years. Same players, except for they've had one change, and then I've been in and out of the band a couple of times. It's fun. I mean, obviously we're not in the area that young bands are, of trying to make a career of it. That's long in the past. For us, it's for fun. And even in these times with the COVID and everything, we're still getting together and rehearsing safely in a huge garage, just for the sake of getting together as a social outlet and playing some music.
What kind of music are you playing in that band?
That band's strictly a cover band, so we do everything from the 60s onward, a lot of vocal, but just a big variety of. Everybody knows 99% of the songs that we play. It's a dance party type band, and Steve's had a regular following in the city for so long that 90% of the people out there are the same ones every time.
When we talk about your various careers, I guess we should focus a little bit on your job as a sound mixer for music and for bands. And that's something that you have done for a long time, and you've done for a lot of different bands. Let's talk about that aspect of your life in terms of the kinds of people that you've worked with and how long that goes back.
Yes, well, when I was at Renaissance Music, and that would have been in the early 80s, is when I started there. Um, I was in charge of the rental department, was renting out sound equipment for every kind of function. And I first got introduced to doing the actual mixing at the Grand Theater, where I still am. 1982, the manager in those days, Nancy Helwig, said, we need somebody to come in and actually mix shows. And so I started doing a bit of that. And shortly thereafter, the Prince George Hotel opened Dollar Bills, which is a very renowned pub. And they started bringing in just about everybody you can think of in those days. And I got to really advance my sound career very quickly, mixing Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee, Rough Trade, that was in those days,
Mm-hmm.
So every Toronto band was anxious to come down and play at that bar. And I was there for off and on for a long time. And then I started my own business and just doing sound. And
you would have done a lot of traveling around with the bands too, I would guess.
I did. When the Grand Theater was closed for quite a long time for renovation, I went out on the road, not right across Canada. I never did any, cross-country tours, but I did a lot of smaller tours in Eastern Ontario and parts of Quebec, working for various promoters. A lot of Celtic music from down east, when they first came up this way. The promoter would book them in, say, 10 cities in Ontario, and I would travel around with the band. So I traveled with the Baron McNeils and John McDermott and people like that.
Spending some time in a hotel in Smiths Falls, was it? With the Tragically Hip?
Yeah, the Elgin Hotel too is another place where I actually mixed Tragically Hip. Yeah, they weren't all highlights.
It wasn't always a 5-star hotel.
No, definitely not. Definitely not.
Let's talk about one particular individual. And when you and I were prepping for this particular conversation, you mentioned a fellow that I had not heard of before. And when you talked about the song, I played the song and I remembered the song.
Of course.
But let's talk about Michael Argue.
Yeah.
Who is Michael Argue?
Well, I picked Michael because I think he's one of those people from Kingston that hardly anybody in Kingston even knows who he is, or was. Mm-hmm. He has passed on, by the way. But Michael was just a young guitar player that right away, all the bands that were already in existence in Kingston said, boy, this new kid is really good. And then he started teaching guitar at my dad's store, and that's how I got to become really good friends with him. I'm particularly affected by him because he introduced me to a lot of fantastic musicians. He was a bit leaning towards blues, but especially with guitar, he introduced me to Jimi Hendrix, Mike Bloomfield, that type of era, Eric Clapton, and Cream, and all these bands. So then every time he'd bring me in a new album to listen to, I'd just be, totally fascinated with his knowledge for a young guy, At any rate, he just started playing in some bands around Kingston as well, but it wasn't long before he took off to Ottawa, and he was in the Esquires for a short period of time, which was one of Ottawa's big bands at the time, and then on to Toronto, where he was in a band called Sea Dog, which had about 4 or 5 albums, I believe. And then Chester was the one that did the song that you're referring to, Make My Life a Little Bit Brighter, which, again, like you say, as soon as you hear it, you say, oh, yeah, I remember that. It's almost accused of being from the bubblegum era of music, because it is a bouncy little happy-go-lucky tune.
Pop tune, yeah.
But it's a good song, and Michael sings that, by the way. That's him singing it. So he was a good singer as well. And then he went into a solo career. He got involved with Scientology, which turned his whole life around, and he kind of vanished for a long time. And me and my buddies that were used to be good friends of his had a hard time tracing him down. And just by coincidence, there was another Michael Argue country singer in Toronto that had a family band, and for quite a long time I thought that's who it was, but the internet wasn't as widely. Now I can see that obviously that wasn't his band, and I was sad to hear that he passed away about 10 years ago, but again, he's not a household name, and he's not even a known name in his hometown of Kingston, which is sad in a way, but that's why I like to mention him.
Why don't we move ourselves right up to present day and talk about some of the people that are performing in Kingston these days? And what I am amazed about is the variety of people who are out there performing.
Yeah, it always amazes me that every time you turn around, there's another new young band that's really anxious to make music their career. And as we all know, COVID aside, it's a difficult lifestyle at any point in time to break into and to be successful and make a good living at it. I've always said, you can count on one hand almost the single musicians in Kingston who make their living totally at playing live music for people. And comes to mind would be like Michael Myers, Spencer Evans, people like that music is their life, and they've made it that way.
That's what they wanted to do.
Yep. But there are, again, like I say, I've recently seen some young people coming up that I was quite impressed with, especially these recent mixing of bands at the Grand Theatre. 3 of those groups, to me, are well on their way to making great music. Whether they will be successful at making a living playing that music is still questionable,
Right. One of the things that I noticed a few months ago, I was looking for some more Kingston product, if you will. And I was introduced to an album called The Embassy Artist Compilation, which was a fundraising effort for Lionheart. And this album was a compilation of recorded product from various Kingston musicians, singer-songwriters. And aside from 1 or 2 of the whole album, I didn't recognize any of the names, which just goes to show that there is a lot more talent out there that some of us have not had the opportunity to sample, to listen to get to know. And what I am amazed about is the amount of songwriting that is being done. So it's not just a performer getting up on stage and doing somebody else's music. They are performers who are getting up and doing their own music, which is
very, very much so. And that's a great thing. When I was trying to make a career of music in Street Noise, I go back to, because that was the band that probably did the most in the music world in my time. That was where we got caught. We were a cover band. We were doing Chicago, Lighthouse, Blood, Sweat and Tears, Crosby, Stills, Nash. But we got offered a record contract in Toronto, and they said, well, yeah, but you have to write some songs. So we did make an attempt at it, and we did write a few, none of which ever got released, unfortunately, on record until we put our own CD together when we revised in the 90s. But at the time, it didn't, and it did hold us back. This was at a time when the Canadian regulations were not really pushing Canadian music either. So the artists up till that time had generally gone to the States to make a career. The typical Gordon Lightfoot, Joni Mitchell, David Clayton Thomas, they all took off to the States to make a living because there wasn't a lucrative market in Canada. People up here listened to their records, but they weren't going to ever get rich that way. And that's held right through. Even bands like Blue Rodeo and Tragically Hip, very successful in Canada. It took a while before the rest of the world caught on to them. And the internet obviously is a big part of that exposure. The other thing that I would mention about the new bands, the young guys, are into writing because they don't have to hire expensive recording studios anymore. A lot of these groups are doing their own recording in their house or elsewhere, and having that access at their fingertips now, it just lends to, okay, let's write some songs, and they can take their time. When you go into a studio, you're paying by the hour. If you don't get it right, well, you've wasted some money probably, you know. Whereas if you're doing it at home, you can take as much time as you want, go back, repeat tracks, things like that, so that it in that respect has become easier.
The people that you are working with right now, that you've been exposed to because you've done their sound or for whatever reason, give me a few names of folks that are currently performing that you are particularly high on.
Well, I recently worked with, there's one group called The Wilderness that you may have had contact with some of these bands because they're all out there really digging for exposure. The Wilderness started as 3 guys that were just buskers. And I did actually mix them at buskers festivals and things. Anyway, The Wilderness have become a bigger band with more players and all original material. They are trying to do the same type of follow-up to, like you say, Tragically Hip, more recently, The Glorious Sons, that type of thing. They are really trying to head in that direction. Of course, this whole pandemic has put that on a hold for now. But in the meantime, they're writing and recording, and it just showed, though, when they were all playing to an audience of 20 people in the Baby Grand Theater, you know, money had nothing to do with it at that point. They said it's just so nice to be standing in front of people playing live music again. Again, their frontman is very active all over the place. He's a good singer, good strong singer. So that's one. And then I was particularly myself impressed with a band called Oak Ridge Avenue. These are young guys that they write all their own material, and I've always been a big fan of the Allman Brothers Band because of the double guitar leads. They always had 2 guitar players playing runs together in harmony. And these young guys are doing that. And I talked to them about that, and you know, they were happy to hear that, but they were very aware of it too, that in fact, that was the case. So that, and their material is again, all original. I don't think they did a cover tune all night when they were there. Another fellow that comes to mind, and you may have had contact with him, is Bon Evans, who plays solo, but he also has a full band. And his band is made up of basically his family. His father plays drums, his stepfather plays guitar, and himself. And I hear his mother's playing drums now too sometimes. But at any rate, again, a great songwriter. He writes really nice songs that really surprised me again. And he's got a really good developed voice. He's a very likable personality. That's a big part of it to me. You know, people want to see him. You know, so there's 3 examples of new in Kingston right now that I'm totally impressed with.
When we talk about songwriting, if we can for just a bit, the whole business of writing something that will appeal to a certain audience, and you never know who's going to like the song that you're writing. And one example I would use is Rob Watkins from Watkins Harp. So he and Tom Harpel have put together a couple of albums now. They've got 2, and they are really popular over in Europe. And I'm just wondering if you have a sense as to why it would appeal to a certain audience but not another.
That's something I've never really understood. It's amazing, and that's not just new either. Some friends of mine had bands that did very little here in Canada, but had again through the internet have a following, and are still. There's a band from the '80s that I can't even really remember their full name. It's a long one, but at any rate, they last year were asked to come over and tour Spain, and these people that were trying to hire them over there said, "You have a huge following over here," which they didn't really even know was happening. And we're talking about a band that hasn't existed for the past at least 20 years. And all of a sudden, they're going over to Spain on a European tour from people who have followed their music. Now, what it was about their music that would have an appeal to young people in Spain, I have no idea. But, go with it. If it works, go with it.
Another one is Ryan Malcolm and Low Level Flight being very popular over in India.
Oh yeah, I didn't know that. I know Ryan very well, but I didn't know he had a big Indian following, but that's great.
One of the things that we should probably spend a few minutes talking about, and that's performing in the age of COVID-19.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we alluded to it a bit earlier when you talked about a show that was on at the Grand, which normally holds, 850 people?
750 is the main theater. That's the Rosen Auditorium. It's closed. We're doing nothing there. We're only operating in the Baby Grand, which has a capacity of about 80 people, but not for social distancing. So we have an audience of 20 people, making it very difficult, again, for anybody to put on a performance there. But I have been approached since we did this, and when I say we did this, actually it was two independent people who have a lot of friends, young friends that play in bands, and they wanted to give them an opportunity to get their music out there and play. So they put up the money to rent the facility and pay for any expenses that were incurred. And I'm sure the intake was very small for the bands, but the bands didn't care. They really didn't. It wasn't the money. It was the fact that they could get out and play, as I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
But to make a living at it, or to even, be successful at running shows, I'm part of a network of Ontario theaters, the technical crews of Ontario theaters, a lot of them in the Toronto area. None of these theaters currently are running shows. If they are, again, it would be on the scale of 20, 25 people. I don't see anything growing bigger for quite some time. I've been in touch with the National Arts Centre in Ottawa, all the Burlington Theatre, the Markham Theatre in Toronto. They're all at a standstill. What they have taken on is the streaming thing. So there's a lot of that, and I'm glad there is, but even at that, myself, I do sit in online when people advertise, and I go to their stream and I'll watch a few minutes of a performance, but I don't really, it's still, nothing's the same as an actual live band sitting in front of you playing.
What is it like for the performer? Now, you've performed and you continue to perform. So if they are doing the streaming thing, odds are they don't have an audience in front of them when they are doing it. If they do, it's just a few people. But what's it like for a musician to basically sing into a camera with no reaction, no feedback?
I've talked to some musicians. It definitely takes some getting used to. Some of the theaters now, the Empire Theatre in Belleville, are doing a lot of streaming. The classic album live series that we always hire at the Grand Theatre sells out for us all the time, and they're doing covers of a particular album. They'll do a Led Zeppelin for one show, and any rate, they're still performing at the Empire Theatre almost weekly. To no audience, but it is streamed, and it just keeps them in the business and keeps their name out there, so that when things do open up again, they won't be something that's long forgotten, So yeah, playing to no audience, even in the Baby Grand, if you got 20 people applauding in a small room, that's a big kick for, I don't know any musicians that would deny that, getting recognized and applause from a live audience is the same as watching live music. That's why it works. They play off each other, and they play better and they perform better, musicians do, when people are listening right there to their music and watching and appreciating. So
I guess we are all hoping that at some particular point the vaccine will be distributed and everyone will have a chance to get the vaccine, and hopefully some semblance of normal will return to the way we live. Now, my question is, have you had conversations with any musicians about what they anticipate happening even after the introduction of a vaccine, in terms of Will it affect the way they perform? Are they just going to go back to normal with the vaccine, or?
Going back to normal, honestly, myself, I don't see that happening for a long time. I think it will. I actually heard an interview on the radio yesterday of somebody who referred to the Spanish flu of 1918 and said, look where we are today. But we're talking nearly 100 years later. So, immediately, I think one of the issues is, even if vaccination becomes a product that everybody is able to get, and that's going to take time, as we all know, without going into the politics of all of that. It's the people themselves. Are they going to feel comfortable going and sitting in a tight room with a bunch of other people?
Yeah.
And some won't. So, where we would have the sold out shows before, I think we probably still could if we were able to open up full again, but I think it's going to take a lot of time before it's back to anywhere near what it was.
We can only hope that things will return to some semblance of normal, and we'll get the opportunity to listen to the musicians, and we hope the musicians will get the opportunity to get up on stage and perform their music for a live audience.
Mm-hmm.
Larry, I thank you very much for your time today. I appreciate your insights, and I always look forward to having a chat with you.
Well, thanks. I do too. We have common interest there in the whole music scene, and you've done a great job with it for the city as well. So it's much appreciated, and thanks very much for having me.
All righty. Take care.
Take care.
Theme music for the program is Stasis Oasis, a tune written and performed by Kingston musician Tim Aylesworth. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions about any of our episodes, please send a note to the Kingstonian Podcast Facebook page. This is Dave Cunningham from Kingston, Ontario. Thank you for listening. Until next time.